All right. So we are in the middle of this slide here. All right. So we're talking about advertising. Whoops. Okay. You see a meme coming. All right, we're talking about advertising, and for some reason your textbook separates us into informative advertising versus persuasive advertising. I don't really care. Advertising can increase demand for something. I don't know, I actually don't watch a lot of TV anymore, but imagine if there's like a Pepsi commercial or something. What it's attempting to do is to actually increase demand for that product. All right, number 4, population. If there's more people, demand increases. All right, baby boomers are getting, they're starting to retire, right? So demand for things that baby boomers like condos. My parents just moved into a condo. European river cruises. That's also something they like. We're going to see changes in demand when it comes to those things. All right, consumer expectations. Now this one's really interesting. People will be more likely to buy something if they think the price will increase in the future. Now let's think about this. If you want a house right now, you want to buy a house, and we know housing prices are super high, but you hear they're going to go even higher. You're more likely to buy that house today, right? So the belief that the price of something's going to increases the demand today. This is particularly important for stocks. So imagine if people think, oh my gosh, the price of Amazon stock is going to increase. There's some rumor. Demand for that stock today actually does increase. There's 2 reasons for that. One, you want to hold it as an investment, or like you think a house is a good investment. The other thing is, if you want to buy it, now's the time, right? You don't want to overpay. So if you need a house, you want to buy it now. The opposite is also true. From what I understand, a lot of you were probably teaching through 2008. In 2008, people were dumping houses, right? That's a supply shift. But we thought housing values are going to plummet, right? And so demand for new housing actually shifted to the left. And then other factors, I just looked in your textbook to remind myself what that is. It's things like having kids. So like if you have kids, you're more like demand for bottles will increase, whatever. Now let's think about that Beeple example. Was there a demand shift? And in which case, why? The guy, like last year, the most anyone had ever paid for his work was $100. So why did the demand increase? Well, let's go through each of these. Did incomes increase in 2001? I don't know, maybe for some people, maybe for super rich people, and maybe Beeple art is a normal good. I don't know. I don't think it's that strong of an effect here. Prices of substitutes? Yeah. Other art has gotten more expensive. Advertising? Maybe Christie's advertised this. I think it's really due to number 5 though. For whatever reason, people in the art world are saying these EFTs, this electronic artwork, is going to just blow up, right? So another thing that's happening in the art world is that art by racial minorities is like super popular right now. And it's super popular because museums have explicitly said they're going to increase the amount they buy. And then people are like, oh my God, I better buy a bunch, right? So, so for example, Sean Combs, who I know as Puff Daddy, right? He actually paid $25 million for, I'm forgetting his name now, for art by an African American. So it's like you think something's going to be really hot, and then you're more likely to buy it. So I think that's what happened on the demand side. Cookie Monster. A lot of you have kids, you know Cookie Monster. The price of cookies decreases, demand for milk increases. Why is that? They are substitutes or complements? Complements. I think it's gross, personally, drinking milk with cookies, but I'm not a kid. What's this? The price of GameStop stock is expected to increase soon. Sure, I'll buy some. Last year when I was teaching this, GameStop was like the hot story. So these, I think they were Reddit day traders. decided to drive up the price of GameStop stock. And because of that, people saw the price go up and they're like, they expect it to keep going up. And so the demand for it actually did go up. Same thing happened with Bitcoin too, right? I think it was last year or the year before. So your book goes through an example for advertising and the demand for clothing. It is helpful to see this as a graph, but I will record a separate video where I'm drawing graphs and explaining things as well, so you're welcome to watch that. Office space. If you could not use quantity demanded and demand at the same thing, that would be great. Is this Game of Thrones? I don't know. One does not simply shift the demand curve by changing the price of a good. This is such a common mistake. You guys know this. Your students probably do this. If I say, the price of marijuana went up because, you know, now we're taxing it. And so the demand for marijuana went down. No, right? If the price goes up, that's a movement along the curve. That does not change the curve. If more people are using marijuana because there's ads, right? Like I was just in Chicago this morning, there's ads for marijuana places. Well, then that could be a demand shift. All right, so one thing that we do at the graduate level that we do not, or I do not do at the undergraduate level, is do this mathematically. I'm going to do it for you for two reasons. One, I think it's a good skill for you to have. Number two, for me, when I see something mathematically, it's an extra way for things to click. And I think this might help you. So what we can do with a demand function is we can actually run a regression. Now, a regression is not something I think I'm going to cover in this class, but it's a statistical method that economists use a lot. And basically what you do is you have a theoretical model, theoretical equation, quantity demanded here, and then we call these independent variables. So that's dependent, independent. So the quantity demanded of a good is a function of the price of that good, Px, price of x, quantity of x, the price of related goods, Py, income, we always use M for income, and then any other variable, they're just using H. It could be like money spent on advertising, demographics, whatever. Now this is helpful for two reasons. Number one, when we talk about shifts in demand or the law of demand, we always say holding other variables constant, right? So the price of a good, if the price of a good goes up, quantity demanded of that good goes down, holding constant all these other things. If you're familiar with how regressions work, that's literally what they do, that you're able to hold, like let's say this, and this constant and look at the relationship between that and that. The other thing is we can look at the magnitudes and the signs. So if I say alpha y is positive, what does that tell you about the relationship between good y and good x? Well, it tells you if the price of good y goes up, demand or quantity demanded for good x goes up, holding other variables constant. It tells you there's substitutes. If alpha m is positive, it's a normal good. If it's negative, it's an inferior good. If it's above 1, sometimes we call that a superior good. So it's helpful to see all this in an equation form. So one thing that your textbook does is it gives numerical examples, which is tedious. It kind of feels like busy work, but I think it's busy work worth doing. So let's just think about this. An economic consultant for X Corporation recently provided the firm's marketing manager with this estimate of the demand function for the firm's product. And this is something people are asked to do. How many of good X will consumers purchase if the price of the good is $200, the price of Y, another good, is $15, income is $10,000, and then whatever A is, I think it's advertising, is $2,000. Are goods X and Y substitutes or complements? Is good X a normal or an inferior good? Well, let's look. There's a positive sign on PY, which to me tells me there's substitutes. No shame in memorizing this. It took me a long time to get to the point where I can do that in my head. If it's negative, they're complements. If it's positive, they're substitutes. And then is the good a normal or an inferior good? It's negative, meaning if M increases, if income increases, people purchase less, so that is an inferior good. And then the other thing we can do here is we can actually calculate how many units are sold, and it's just a matter of plugging it in. We will go through another example in the separate video where I'm going through examples. All right, so one thing that's super annoying about supply and demand in economics is this is what we would use econometrically. This is what we call a demand function, where quantity is on the left and price is on the right. But what we graph is the opposite. Okay, so we graph P on the X and P on the left and X on the Y, Q on the Y. You see what I mean? All that it takes to transform it is you just do some algebra and rearrange it. Again, I will do this in a separate video, but it's not something I want to go through if that's easy to you. But that's called the inverse demand function. The only time I really would ask you to do this is if I wanted you to graph something. So if I gave you a problem like this and asked you to graph it. There you go. You can graph it. All right, and the last thing we're going to cover with demand is consumer surplus. So my example of consumer surplus is, when did this happen to me recently? I went to a store, I don't know, we'll say I went to like TJ Maxx or something, and I was going to pay, say, $15 for a workout shirt, which is something I bought recently. And let's say I go to the register and they're like, oh, actually there's an additional sale today, you only have to pay 10. So I was willing to pay 15, but I only had to pay 10. That's what we call consumer surplus. So if you add up that for everyone who might purchase something, like everyone who's in a demand curve, we can calculate consumer surplus. You might even say that I was willing to pay 20 for it, and if I had bought it for 15, there was already consumer surplus. The most helpful thing to do, guys, is just look at the graph. If this good, whatever it is, the market price is $3, you can look on the demand curve and be like, well, this one person was going to pay $4. So the difference between what that person was willing to pay and what they have to pay is consumer surplus. I don't like the quantities 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It makes it kind of hard to see. If you want to picture it as like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, it makes more sense to have a continuous line here. Regardless, that's consumer surplus. The difference between what someone would be willing to pay and what they actually have to pay. All right, and you can calculate it using geometry. I'm not sure that I'm going to ask you to do that. If I do, of course, I'll provide extra help. That's my favorite one. Hopefully I don't do that with you. All right, so I'm just going to introduce the concept of a supply curve, and then I'm going to stop for the day. I'll pick it up tomorrow, probably from campus. But a supply curve is not as easy. And I always tell students this. We are demanders, right? We shop every day, we buy stuff. A lot of us don't supply things. So I always like to think of an example of knitting scarves. We would all be able to knit scarves if we chose to, right? And there's always someone who's really good at it, and then there's someone like me who's not detail-oriented, who would be bad at it, whatever. If the price of a scarf is $1, how many people would knit? I don't know, some people. If the price is $1 million a scarf, who is going to knit? All of us, right? We're going to Hobby Lobby or wherever we shop, and we're buying knitting needles, and we're taking tutorials. So think about when the price of a good goes up, the quantity supplied of that good goes up. For two reasons. One, you get even the non-efficient people. You get me, who would be bad at it. You get people with high opportunity costs. I've got better things to do, right? I've got young kids and a full-time job. And so it's really just helpful to think, okay, now we're putting our focus on suppliers, on their incentives. All right, so I'm going to sign off for today, and then I will pick this up tomorrow in another video.